So I never introduced myself. My name is Hannah. I'm the Student and Graduate Engagement Officer at AHEAD. So briefly to run through what AHEAD do, 3 different kind of areas mainly that you're looking at. The first being access in college. At that stage we're doing some work around admissions routes like the DARE scheme, stuff like that. 3rd level, then we start to look at self-advocacy, disclosure, and prepare students for work. The employment stage, then we're looking at disclosure, legislation, and again kind of amping up that preparing for work kind of element. Bigger picture, then we do a lot of lobbying, we contribute to policy, we release annual statistics on the participation of students with disabilities in higher ed. So that's kind of a one-stop shop of what we do. So looking at the number of students, just to give us a kind of I suppose an outline of what we're looking at here. From 2008 we started recording the amount of students with disabilities that there are in higher ed. Started at about 3,600 students, and since then up until our last figures of 2021 we have over 17,000, so 17,866 students registered with the Disability Service. The important thing to know here is that even though that number has risen every year, the fund for students with disabilities, so the money that's there to support students, has remained largely the same, which means that obviously that support has changed in that time. So disability legislation, it's not to get too bogged down in the legislation or to worry about needing to know like kind of names of things or whatever, but it is good to kind of have that information in your back pocket so that you feel more confident when you're having these conversations with employers about disclosure. So the 2 pieces of legislation we're looking at is the Equal Status Act and then the Disability Act 2005. So the Disability or the Equal Status Act 2000 is the one that looks at reasonable accommodations, which we'll kind of explore a little bit. So firstly, what does the legislation say in terms of what is a disability? So this is a good piece of information because I think a lot of people feel like there's an exhausted list of disabilities, but that's not really how it works. In the legislation, it kind of has these 5 different categories of disability that are kind of statements around how a disability can affect someone. And that's a really good piece of legislation because you know you don't need a specific diagnosis in order for the legislation to apply. So what's a reasonable accommodation? Reasonable accommodation is any action that is put in place to lessen disadvantage that someone with a disability faces. So these are really common in college or in the workplace. So in college it would be things like exam supports or things like supports so that students can participate in lectures. And in a work context it works largely the same. In that reasonable accommodations are put in place to allow qualified people to do the role that they're hired to do, to undertake the job tasks that are expected of them. So under the legislation, reasonable accommodation provides for appropriate, effective and practical measures where needed in a particular case to enable a person who has a disability to have access to goods and services. So when it comes to employment, this isn't only just getting the job, but also upskilling opportunities, advancement in employment, so promotions and things like that, and the opportunity to undergo training and stuff like that, as well as that could include like needing extra introduction time and stuff like that. So the caveat then is unless this measure imposes a disproportionate burden on the employer. So this is where it becomes a little bit tricky because there's no financial amount that is deemed reasonable and financial amount that's deemed unreasonable, and it's not always about money either. It's all about the premises being accessible, patterns of work and time, distribution of tasks, extra training or providing accessible resources. The important thing then to note is that it doesn't include any treatment facility or thing that a person would ordinarily use or provide for themselves. So for example, someone who used hearing aids, they would be expected to provide them anyway because they'd be using them outside of the workplace. So when you're requesting a reasonable accommodation, what you need to do as a graduate is understand how you do something, so how you do your work, knowing what accommodations work best for you. So employers aren't going to be disability experts, so really you need to know, or it's better if you do know what kind of supports you're going to be looking for. And then you need to have a positive attitude or confidence going into that conversation, and encouraging others and your employer to get to know you and how you do things, rather than, I suppose, the diagnosis that you have or the supports that you need. So really you want to go into that conversation being in control and knowing what you need from them. So employers are used to providing flexibility. That's just something to kind of make sure that you feel a little bit more confident going into that conversation. It's not only for people with disabilities, the likes of parents, they might need flexi time in order to collect their kids or bring them to school or collect them or whatever. And employers are used to having to be flexible with that. And then just to note then that 2 out of 3 of accommodations don't incur any costs to the employer. So a lot of time, and we'll look at that, a lot of the time, the accommodations that we're seeing, they don't actually cost money. It's not always going to be a big financial cost. So if we look at some statistics, all the statistics in the next couple of slides are from our WAM program statistics, so our work placement program. So these are all based off graduates that we placed on our program. So looking at interview accommodations, 4 out of 5 of our graduates didn't need any accommodations when it came to interviews, but the 426 applications that did request accommodation at interview needed things like an accessible room, an accessible format. So for some that maybe means having an online interview rather than in person. Some needed an ISL interpreter, things like communication assistance, maybe someone needed a sighted guide. So these are the types of things that happen at interview, but largely a lot of people, or most people with disabilities, don't need accommodations when it comes to interview support. So then types of reasonable accommodations once you have the job. This is good to, we'll kind of start to look at what kind of accommodations are common, but it's good for you to explore this yourself and to have a think about it in relation to your own disability, what could work. So as you can see there, of our WAM graduates, the biggest, the most popular type of support is work tasks. So almost 70% of our accommodations for our WAM graduates is around work tasks, so how people do their job. The next is hardware, so people needing, a specific chair or an ergonomic setup or something like that. Then the next is then medical appointments, so people needing time off for their medical appointments, that kind of thing. So some of the types of accommodations that we see is around assistive technology or equipment, adaptations to the workplace, so if someone uses a wheelchair and they need a lift or something like that. Flexible working hours is huge. Such a huge part of accommodations is having flexibility in how we work, and then provision of training as well. So if someone maybe needed a slightly longer induction period. So to go through some examples, flexible working hours, I think this is a really big one and a really important one for a lot of people. So this can be, and these are all things that you can request from employers, and that employers will be used to seeing this type of support coming through, and you're entitled to these types of supports. So you're not only entitled to stuff that's going to cost money, but also in how you operate or how you work. So these are the types of things that you can look for. So things like time off for medical appointments, and that shouldn't come off your annual leave or anything like that. That's a separate thing entirely, so you're entitled to that time off to attend medical appointments. Flexi time is a big one as well, and something that most employers actually offer now anyway. So maybe if you take a medication that makes you really tired in the morning, or you need breaks or something like that, to allow for, like for example, if someone is diabetic and needs to check insulin levels or something like that, they would allow for breaks in between the day so that they can do that. Or things like a later start time or longer breaks to accommodate sleeping patterns. So someone who maybe takes a medication that needs a nap in the afternoon, or maybe they're going to be very sleepy in the morning, so they work a slightly later morning and then work that up into the afternoon. So all of these things can be accommodated, and it's something that I suppose you can request. Work tasks as well. So this is another really big one. So things like employers should be playing to the strengths of their team. So allocating tasks according to the strengths and taking into account anyone that needs to be accommodated. So for example, if you have a colleague who is deaf and uses Irish Sign Language, maybe they're going to take up the slack in answering emails, and someone else can look after answering the phones. So things like that, where you're being accommodated, but the work is all still being done and you're still contributing to the team. And then the next one then is provision of training. So allowing time for mobility training, particularly for those who maybe are blind or visually impaired, or someone who has a physical disability, arranging ISL interpreters for those who use them, any notes or material from training sessions in advance or in an accessible format, things like allowing audio recordings or meetings to be recorded so that you can refer back, and then written material being offered in alternative formats, so maybe online or in large print or something like that. So then in terms of what we can offer, so we have a graduate placement program called WAM. So our WAMWorks database, we have lots of different roles that come out throughout the year. So in order to qualify for that, you just need to have a disability and have a level 6 qualification or be working towards a level 6 qualification or above. You'll get notified when any of our jobs go live, and how those jobs work is you apply directly with the company, and then we offer support and guidance throughout the placement, and you get notified and you can apply for those paid graduate placements. So you can visit them at ahead.ie/WAMWorks, and on top of the actual work placements that we have, also have lots of workshops and stuff throughout the year too on job upskilling opportunities, like CV writing or presentation skills, that kind of thing. So I would recommend that anyone, even if you're still currently a student, to register on that database, and then you can also check in with our WAM team as well if you have any queries. So yeah, that was a really speedy look through on the types of accommodations. We are actually here, we do have a stand here, so if anybody wants to explore any of those further, please do come see us, or you can come up to me now as well. So thanks so much, everybody.
Questions, Hannah.
Yeah.
Share the locality.
Yeah.
So that was fantastic. Thank you very much, Hannah. I suppose the questions that I have and the team at Slido have are, I suppose, what impact, if any, has COVID had on those working through adverse conditions or with a disability? Has it been positive, has it been negative, or I suppose has there been no real change just yet?
So yeah, COVID has actually been a really interesting time for people with disabilities, in particular because working from home has become so common, and people with disabilities have been asking for working from home as an accommodation for a long time. So being able to see that as an option has made work possible for a lot of people. So it's been a really positive change, and actually we've seen that the government announced a while back that there is some allowance for employers or for employees to request working from home as an accommodation. So yeah, that's really been a huge change, and that I think COVID made, although it was obviously a very hard time for everybody, it made work possible for a lot more people, which is great. Yeah.
Absolutely. And I suppose, how important is a support network to those, I suppose, with working with a disability or through adversity, in terms of, I suppose, also not like-minded people or people in the same position, but also people, I suppose, who wouldn't be working through that, so they can obviously rely on them to support them and help them through it.
Yeah, so I think it's always good to kind of have a network there where you can bounce ideas off and that kind of thing. In particular, in a lot of larger employers, they will have resource groups, so the likes of ERGs, particularly around disability, and I would always encourage graduates to get involved with those ERGs, because it's a great chance to meet like-minded people and to maybe learn more about what supports you could benefit from. And then obviously organisations like AHEAD are always good to have in your network too, because we can offer support and guidance if there is any questions that you have around what's possible here in terms of support. But yeah, I think it's really important for any graduate to build a network of professional kind of contacts that they have, and particularly so for graduates with disabilities, it's always good to have those who understand the kind of the need for supports and accommodations as well. Yeah.
I suppose the final question is, as we go into a world with hybrid working and kind of all of our post-COVID learnings, I suppose taking them into account, how important is it that employers make better strides or better attempts to, I suppose, communicate their ability to work with and have people working through a disability or people working through adversity as part of their wider ecosystem? Is it something that you think is already happening, or do you think it's something that is I suppose, a couple of years down the line because we're still not where we need to be?
Yeah, as I kind of mentioned in the first question you asked there, was around the hybrid working, and over COVID, we've really seen a boost in accessibility for a lot of employers, because they were able to see that working from home was possible, and that, you know, that opened the workforce up to many people who otherwise wouldn't have been able to do that. And I think what's important now is, as we go back, or as we kind of emerge into a new kind of normal where hybrid working is very common, it's important that we don't forget all of the learnings that we had, that we still enable people to work in whatever way suits them. So I think what's important for employers to do is to remember how much value the talent pool of disabled graduates can bring to the table, and to make sure that they're not cutting off you know, possible employees because hybrid working is not going to be a setup. So I think there is lots being done. It is something that's being talked about, and something that employers are aware of. And I think it's important that, you know, we remember all of the benefits that happened throughout COVID, and the kind of pressure that was put under, that we had to kind of transform. It's important not to go backwards in that as well. Yeah.
That's fantastic, Hannah. I really appreciate you chatting to us today. That was great. Thank you very much.
Thanks, everybody.